Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live session today. I am super excited to have you all join me to talk a little bit about intentionality in our actions and processes today. And if you have not been following along, this live session is part of our newsletter series on LinkedIn. And the newsletter is called The Conscious Leader. And in that newsletter, we are covering all of the concepts from my book series. And my book series is the Leadership Consciousness Essentials series. And there is a series of 6 books. There's an intro book and a closing book, and there are 4 major concepts as part of those books. In this session, we're going to be talking about concepts from book 2, which is Conscious Intentionality. And in this book, we are covering some concepts. I will actually show those to you here right now. So we're talking about conscious intentionality, which is the practice of acting with purpose and clarity while making choices that are going to align with our values and our desired outcomes. And as part of this concept, there are 6 major dimensions that we talk about: thoughts, emotions, behaviors, actions, processes, and communities. And today we're going to be covering 2 of those dimensions. We're going to be talking about our actions and our processes. And so, again, super excited to have you all join us and to walk through some of this. And I want to just start by acknowledging that today we're going to talk about the two topics from our last 2 newsletters, and specifically, how do leaders make value-driven choices, and so specifically intentional actions, and then how do they either create or redesign intentional processes on 2 different levels, the personal level and the collective level, that are going to either reinforce their values or kind of erode their values in team or organizational dynamics. And what we're going to do here today is we're going to bring both of these concepts together. We're going to look at it in the context of some of the previous things that we talked about in terms of our thoughts and our emotions and our behaviors. And then we're going to frame it from the actions and the processes. Now, for this discussion today, we're going to talk about the difference between some of our habitual behaviors, which was the last dimension that we covered, and how to make actual values-driven decisions, or to choose actions based on our values. And we're going to talk a little bit about how both our actions and the actions that we don't take are going to impact our team culture. And then we will talk very briefly about how to actually design intentional processes or systems that are going to help you create the culture that you want for your teams or your organizations. And so to start us off, I want to just first say intentional action is what is going to close our incongruence gap. And so it's going to help us to actually demonstrate to the people on our teams what we value and what we care about. And then our intentional processes are going to help us kind of create that congruence on a larger level or a larger scale. And so our actions are the personal part of this, and then our processes, while there is a personal aspect, is mostly collective. So to start us off, as we do with all of our sessions, I want to make sure that we are just kind of coming together. We're arriving and centering ourselves in this place. And so all we're going to do really quickly is have you find a nice and comfortable seat. Take a long, slow breath in. And as you exhale, we want you to let go of anything that might be holding you back right now. Whether it's physical tension in your body, thoughts of wherever you just came from, or whatever's ahead of you, I want you to just let that go. Try to forget about, your emails, the meetings that you have, or anything else that's causing pressure or anxiety for you. Another deep breath in and deep breath out. And what I always ask for people to do is to set an intention for this session. And so specifically for us, we're going to talk about our actions and our processes. And for you, what do you want to get out of this? Do you want to have a goal or a desire of what you want to learn or how you want to practice, what you want to implement? So set an intention to be here, to listen, and to get what you need from the session. Now, over the last several months, we have been covering different topics related to integrating consciousness into our leadership. And specifically within conscious intentionality, we started with our thoughts. So what are the stories that we tell ourselves about our leadership and the actions and behaviors that we take from that? We talked about how our emotions are going to shape not only our own responses, but the collective around us. So it's going to influence our team and our team dynamics. And then we talked about some of the micro behaviors that are either going to reinforce or erode the values that we claim to hold. And from here, we're going to move into our last two newsletters where we think about and process, what do we actually do? So the actual actions that we choose to take, what do we do when the stakes are high? Or when there is uncertainty, when the path is not clear, whatever. What do we actually do in those moments? And then what are the systems that exist within our cultural and environmental context that we are operating within? And we're not going to talk about it right now, but in a minute, we'll talk about the personal side of this and the collective side. So what are the processes that we have for ourselves? And then what are the processes that we have for our teams? And how do those processes support the leader that you want to be specifically? And so one key thing that I want to talk about here is that our leadership, while intention and intentionality is absolutely critical, it is not going to actually define our leadership. We could have the best intentions in the world and still not act in accordance with our own values or with our own intentions. And so our leadership is ultimately going to be defined by the impact of our actions and our decisions. And so again, if you follow any of my work, we talk about the difference between intention and impact. And so in the diversity and inclusion field, this is really, really important because while many people have the best of intentions, they still say things and do things that impact people in negative ways. And as leaders, we have to understand that regardless of what our intention is, our impact is what is going to define our leadership. And so we have to make sure that our actions and our impact is aligning with the intention that we have. And so when we talk about conscious intentionality, it's about making sure that our thoughts are in alignment with the impact that we want to have, that our emotions are in alignment with the impact that we want to have, our behaviors, our actions, our processes, and our larger community are also focused in on the actual impact, the way that people experience our leadership. Right. And so key thing I want to talk about here is that our leadership is mostly going to be defined in high pressure moments. And while that is hands down true for the vast majority of what we're going to talk about, it is also equally important to have our everyday actions, our everyday choices, and our everyday behaviors also reflect that intended impact. And so when we're talking about the actions that we take and the systems that we want to build or the processes that we want to build here, it's not just about these big picture decisions and actions that we take. It's also about every single day, how do we set ourselves up to choose the best actions that we want to take for the future? And are those actions and those processes in alignment with the version of ourselves that we want to be, that we want to portray? And so let's start first with action, intentional action. So in the newsletter, we talked about this as the moment of choice. And this is where we're going to expand outwardly into our actual systems that are going to carry our choices forward. And so our actions Our habitual actions are what is going to create that larger context for the systems that we're participating in. And so a single action one-off is helpful, but the most important thing is how do our habitual actions over time create congruence or incongruence with our values. So when we talk about actions here, I want to just clarify a little bit what I mean between the difference between our behaviors and our actions, because this is a really fine line, I think. And I think it's important to be clear when we talk about actions that it's not the same as our behaviors. So our behaviors are our habitual, everyday, repeated patterns that we do throughout our lives. And so it's things like whether or not we smile in our daily interactions, the tone that we bring, how we actually listen to other people, how do we respond when people challenge us? All of these things are baseline behaviors that are going to determine how people experience us in general. And then the actions that we're talking about as part of conscious action is the larger and more consequential decision points. Things like, who do we hire? Who do we promote? Do we speak up in moments when we know that we should and we might feel safe or not? How do we navigate conflicts that are really difficult and we know are going to be tricky right from the beginning? How do we navigate those? How transparently do we communicate things to our team in moments of tension or conflict or change, and those kinds of things? So those larger actions are the actual conscious choices that we make that are going to influence how people see us as a leader. And our actions are what it's going to actively demonstrate the integrity that we have to ourselves and to our values. And so our intentional action is about making conscious and deliberate choices that are going to be rooted in our values and oriented towards who we want to be as leaders. And so in these moments, the question is not, what needs to happen right now, but we have to have a deeper processing or questioning of how do I move through this situation or this circumstance in a way that is going to stay true to who I am, to what I value, and to the kind of leader that I want to be in this moment. And so it's about consciously focusing your attention and choosing based on the circumstances and the values that you have. And so pause here is really important. And so if you've been following along, you know that we talk quite a bit about developing a pause practice, learning how to pause, the importance of pause. And we haven't kind of dived into the pause practice framework, which we will do in book 4, which is a couple of months away. But pause is going to be essential in everything that you do. You have to have a practice of pausing so that you can ask yourself the deeper question. And so the deeper question here, or questions, I guess, is, does this choice reflect the leader that I want to be or that I'm committed to becoming? Am I acting from clarity and from my values, from my organizational values, or am I just responding based on the context of urgency or fear that either the culture or the organization is putting on me? And what is the actual outcome that I want to get from this? And does the action that I'm taking move me towards that or move me away from that? And so if we don't have a pause practice, then we can't actually consciously lay out these questions. And if we can't consciously lay out these questions to answer them in terms of, does this action support this value or this goal? And if we can't do that, then we are not consciously choosing. And so the really important thing about conscious action is making sure that you have a process in place to establish pause in your daily routines and in your practices, so that when a big action moment comes up, you can, in your head, pause quickly and ask yourself, does this action get me to this outcome? Does it move me away from this outcome? Does it support me in the goals that I have? And all of these things. So going through that process in your head. Now, unlike our behaviors, our actions are never neutral. They always are going to set some form of precedent. And they're going to teach people what to expect from you. They're going to show people what is considered normal, what's considered safe, what is considered possible. And so your actions are actively going to shape everything around you and around your team. And so where your behaviors, you can easily bounce back if you're having a bad day and you don't smile at someone or you don't check in with someone. Then, like, those are behaviors that you can bounce back from. And so you have more leeway and more flexibility with your behaviors. While your behaviors are absolutely critical and are going to support you on this journey, your actions are rarely neutral in that way. And so while having a bad day, not smiling at someone or not checking in with someone, behaviors, right, could potentially cause someone to take a step back and ask them if they can actually trust you. It's much easier to bounce back from those behaviors because then you can follow them up regularly after that. Right? Whereas our actions are the more influential decision points that we have that are going to teach people whether or not it's safe or whether or not it's going to kind of determine who you are and how you are. And so it's much harder if you make a bad choice in terms of an action that you have to take. Like you hire someone who's your buddy instead of the person who was been there, been doing the job and is the best qualified candidate, right? It's much harder to come back from that than it is to come back from, hey, I had a really hard day yesterday. I didn't check in with you. I'm sorry. How are you doing? Right? So very, very different. Now, one thing that I want to highlight here is that, like everything, it's really, really easy for us to do things that we are in alignment with when things are calm. And it almost always doesn't impact our presence and our influence. If everything is status quo, we know what our values are, we're acting in alignment with them. But when pressure comes on, whatever form of pressure that is, whether it's organizational pressure, whether it's cultural pressure, whether it's political pressure, anytime pressure comes into the circumstance, that is when we're going to be tested the most. And so when competing things are colliding in front of you and you have to decide in that moment, what is the choice or the action that I want to take? And is it in alignment with my own values, with my organizational values, with my team values? And in many circumstances, it isn't always going to align with these outside pressures. A really good example is the political environment, right? And so especially in the United States right now, there's a lot of really negative and harmful political pressures that are causing people to compromise on their values. And regardless of where you're at on that and which direction you're leaning towards, like, political pressure is forcing people to act not in alignment with their values. And so this is what we mean. The most important test is when you are tested, when that pressure is on, do you act in alignment with your values or do you not act in alignment with your values? And these are the actions that are really, really critical to the overall culture. And so you as a leader are going to be defining and setting the tone of that team, that organization, that whatever it is that you're operating within. And so the reminder here is, as you're navigating all of those pressures, how do you move through that in a way that's going to stay true to who you are, to what you value, and to the leader that you want to be? Now, when we talk about intentional action, we almost always talk about it in terms of like the visible choices. But I want to remind you all that it's not just the visible choices that we make, but it is also the choices that we don't make. And what I mean by this is when we know that we should speak up and we don't. When we know that there's a hard conversation that we have to have, but we keep kicking the can down the road because we're not ready for it or because we're scared of it. And when we see something that we know isn't right, but we choose to let it go, right? When we withhold an action that is in alignment with our values, we are telling our team members that we do not value what we say we value, right? And so if I take an action, it's going to tell them one way or the other whether or not I actually hold that value to be true. And if we don't take an action, it is doing the same thing. And so when we withhold that action and we stay silent, when we know that we need to say something because it directly contradicts our values, then we are not remaining neutral. We are actually reinforcing the same things that we say we want to change. And so really, really key component of action here is not just the actions that we take, but the actions that we don't take. Because I guarantee you, especially in the face of inequality or injustice, when we don't take action, the people who are actively being oppressed and marginalized see you avoid that action. They see you choosing not to step up, choosing not to be on the right side. And so like the really, really important thing here is that discomfort and that inaction is also an action in itself, right? And if we want to maintain our congruence, we have to not only take action, but we have to take action that's in alignment with our values and our organizational desires. Now, let's move into our intentional processes. So when we talk about processes in the context of intentionality, I want to be clear that we have two major areas of processes. We have our personal processes, and then we have these larger collective processes. We'll talk about each one of those in a minute. But what's really important for you to understand about processes is that while all of your individual actions, no matter how aligned they are or not, they all exist inside this larger context of our team, our organizations, our communities, our states, our nationalities, our United Nations. Like we all exist in these different layers. And so while our individual actions are important, our processes, personal processes and collective processes are what is going to actually influence the larger whole. And so for you, when you think about this, you're thinking about your daily routines, your team's meeting culture, your organizational decision-making structures, any unspoken norms or unconscious bias that exist. And these are the processes that are either going to work towards your values or against them. And most people don't actually create the processes within their organizations and even their own personal processes. Most people just inherit their processes either from their families, from their communities, from their churches, from the organizations that they participate in, and they never question those processes. So when we talk about bringing conscious intentionality into our processes, we want you to think about it on two levels: the personal level, so your daily routines, your mental and emotional health practices, how you rest, how you reflect, how you learn, how you restore your health and well-being. And all of these are going to contribute to your overall leadership. So if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of your work-life balance, that is going to directly impact your leadership. So you need to have personal processes that are going to support the leader that you want to be and the organizational dynamics that you want to support, right? And so if you don't have the ability to calm and regulate your nervous system through whatever processes are going to help you do that, then you're never going to be able to take that next step in the team dynamic to regulate the team nervous system. And so like you have to have your own processes, and then you also have to support the collective processes of your team or organization. And so personal and then the collective. And so what do we mean when we say collective? We mean how you run your actual meetings, who has a voice in the decision-making process, how are people evaluated for their performance, how does your team navigate conflict, how do they integrate pause and reflection into their processes, how do people get hired, how do people get promoted. All of these things are collective processes that are going to support the values that the organization claims to have or are going to quietly work against those values. And so what you have to do as a leader is you have to have your own processes to navigate all of the personal dynamics, and then you have to also create or recreate processes within your team and your organization that are going to support the collective. Now, one thing I want to share here is, previously we talked about how our unconscious beliefs can distort our thinking. And we talked about how our unprocessed emotions can leak into our behaviors, and how our behaviors can impact our actions and our team dynamics. And so what I want us to recognize here is that unexamined processes are going to do the same thing. If we don't examine the processes that we have or define or redefine those processes, then they're going to erode whatever foundation that you are trying to lead from. And so if you haven't intentionally looked at the processes that you have to say, does it support this value? Does it support this outcome? Does it support this culture that we want to have? If you have not intentionally done that, then you're already failing your team, because odds are they are not supporting any of those items. Your values, your outcomes, like your culture, is not supporting any of those kinds of things. And so as a leader, you have to create or recreate those processes. And so most people inherit those processes. They come into a larger organization. Those processes have already been defined, and you just step in and you inherit them from whoever was in that position before you. And conscious intentionality asks you as a leader to step in and to say, what are the processes that we have here? Do those processes support our values, our desired outcomes, and our culture, or do they not support them? And if they don't, then how do we redefine those processes to give clear guidance to the team on exactly what we want them to understand and to take away? So the question that I want you all to take away from this is, what are the actual systems that you are operating within? And are they producing the culture that you want? And then the second part of this question is, what systems do you need to redesign to support your desired outcomes? And let me go back and say design or redesign, because in some circumstances, there just aren't any processes that support your goals and your values. And so what are the processes that you need to design or redesign that are going to support your desired outcomes? Now, again, many of us were never taught that we need to tend to some of these dimensions of our intention. And we were simply handed these cultural norms and these thoughts about how we need to prioritize ourselves and others. And we built our lives around all of these things. So what conscious intentionality asks you to do is to stop and to reflect. Do these actions and do these processes reflect who I am, what I value, and who I'm trying to become? All right. Now, what I want to do really quickly is I want to just talk about different processes in your life to help you kind of be able to practically understand and grasp some of the things that we're talking about. And so what I want to do is I want to propose a couple of areas that I can share, both personal and collective aspects to help you kind of feel more confident in this. So there are 5 areas that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about daily rhythms, conflict and difficulty, growth and advancement, feedback and reflection, and then decision making. So when we talk about our actual daily rhythms, and we want to talk about the processes that we have on a personal level and on a collective level. On the personal level, you want to think about, do you have a consistent practice, whether that is reflection, meditation, movement, meaningful connection, whatever that practice is? Do you have a consistent practice that is going to help you to process and to integrate or restore personally? And I think probably, what ways do you, when I say restore, what ways do you take care of your health and well-being so that you can show up and be the leader that you want to be every day? I call it self-care in terms of, how do you take care of yourself so that you can show up for others? But how do you restore your health and well-being to show up every day personally? Okay? And on the collective level, you want to think about your team's recurring rhythms. And so the meetings that you have, do they serve the people that you're working with? Or are they just, for lack of a better word, performances that everyone has? They come, they say what they're supposed to say about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and those kinds of things. And so what are the actual collective processes in your daily routines? And are they in alignment with your values? And are they supporting your team's goals? Now, in terms of like conflict and difficulty and how you navigate that, from the personal perspective, you want to think about when you are genuinely struggling with an emotional thing, with a physical disability, or a damaged relationship that you have. Do you actually have processes that are going to support you to move through that in the ways that are going to be helpful for you? Or have you simply inherited some sort of pattern that is going to push people away, push through whatever the concern is? Or do you actually get into the experience of feeling, experiencing, processing, navigating all the things that you need to do to get you back to your center, right? And then on the collective level, this looks like when you have tension that arises, what kind of processes do you invite to kind of surface and work through some of those things? Or do you kind of, can't think of the word right now, do you like repress all of those things that need to be surfaced because you don't feel comfortable and ready? So what is the actual process that you have to surface and work through some of that conflict and some of that difficulty on your teams? And if you don't have a process, what is a process that you can implement to help you, knowing that you might lean towards, I want to stay away from this because it's too complex or it's too difficult? Now, when we talk about growth and advancement, so personally, how do you attend to your mental health, to your emotional development, to your physical well-being, and how do you do that in a way that's going to support your professional growth? And so what kind of support structures do you have? What kind of processes do you have? So for me, in order for me to go to the gym every day, I have to remind myself at a specific time every day, whether I'm out or whether I'm in the house, I will put my gym clothes on as a reminder. So for me, my process is to put my gym clothes on so I know I have to go to the gym, right? And so other people, when they take their work clothes off, they might put on their pajamas, or they might shower or do something else. And for me, my process is don't even go to that next level. Put your gym clothes on, and that is automatically you have to go to the gym. So what are your processes that help you with that? And collectively, what kinds of ways do you recognize and promote people? What kinds of practices do you have that make sure that people's voices are heard and that you can bring influence to their thoughts and their beliefs, right? So that other people can see them and other people can decide how to help them grow or how to help them advance. When we talk about things like feedback and reflection on a personal level, what do you do to reflect on and to inform your growth? Do you journal? Do you talk to other people about your actions and your behaviors and other ways that you might grow? Do you participate in 360-degree feedback on every certain timeline? Like, what are the actual processes that you have to help you personally? And then collectively, how do you get feedback from your team member, and how do you create a dynamic within your team where feedback is expected and that it's honest and it's genuine and it's multi-directional? And how do you share positive and negative and neutral feedback with your team? And so, like a process, once a week, you can have a team meeting that is specifically dedicated to multi-directional feedback. Anyone and everyone can share feedback about anything that is happening in the organization, right? Simple, easy process. And decision making, right? What is your process for actually finding clarity, grounding yourself in your thoughts, in your beliefs, in your values, so that you can make decisions that are going to be rooted in those values, right? And so what is your actual personal process for making decisions? Is it a structured process, or is it just I sit down and I take 10 minutes to think through all of the things? Right? And so what is your personal process for decision making? And collectively, who is actually participating in the decision making? Whose voices are heard, whose voices are not heard, and what kind of space do you provide for team members to participate in that process? And so the vast majority of organizational decisions that happen in a vacuum, whether it's one or two members of the leadership team making a decision for the collective. That's not always the best path forward. And so how can you create processes where you can get feedback and collect information from other people to facilitate the decision making, right? And hopefully that's helpful to help you understand kind of the processes and designing processes that are going to help individuals to bring more intention and more conscious choice to that process. So what I want to do now is I want to bring both of these dimensions together, and I want to help you to understand how they work together. And so your individual actions are what's going to set precedent, right? Your repeated actions are going to become the norms of your team. And those norms are going to become the culture of the organization. And that culture is either going to support the values that you claim to have, or it's going to erode the values that you claim to have. And so what we want you to understand is that the actions and the processes are going to create this culture, and it's either supporting or suppressing the culture that you want. Right. So when we talk about intentional action, it's about making conscious choices from your values. And when we talk about intentional processes, it's about designing systems that are going to carry your values forward. And so even when you're not in the room as a leader, you want the collective culture of the organization to do the exact same thing that you want them to do. Right? And so intentional action is going to close the gap between what you say you value and what you do. And then the processes are going to facilitate the congruence at an organizational level. Right? All right. Now, maybe let's do a really quick practice. We're at about 39 minutes. So we'll take about 5 minutes to do intellectual processing, reflective exercise, and then we'll close out here. So what I want you to do is I want you to bring this into your lived experience. And so I want you to think of this as a pause practice for you to contemplate and to examine the relationship that you have between what you say matters to you. So what are your values? What are your organization's values? And what you consistently do personally and collectively that support those values. So what I want you to do is I'm going to share 3 or 4 questions, and I just want you to think about them from this standpoint. So what is one high stakes action that you've been postponing that if you consciously approached would bring your leadership into closer alignment with your values or with your organizational values? So one action that you've been postponing that you can bring conscious intentionality to. And the second question is, what emotion or what fear or unconscious bias or any other feeling or emotion might be keeping you from taking action? And like we've shared before in previous live sessions, oftentimes there's almost always an emotion or a fear that prevents us from taking the actions that we want, that we know that we should take and that we want to take. So what is it that's keeping you from taking that action? And finally, what is one process, whether it's a personal process or a collective process, are you currently operating in that you inherited instead of consciously chose or created? And does it serve who you're trying to be? And so what is one process, whether it's personal or collective, that you did not consciously create, and does it serve who you are trying to be as a leader? Now, of course, you'll have access to this recording, so you can come back to those questions if you need, or if you want to take more time to journal on those. So feel free to come back if you do want or need to do that. And in our next newsletter, which is going to be dropping on April 7th, we're going to move into the last dimension, which is community. And this is about accountability, and it is about commitment to the collective. And so when we talk about community, it is about helping you to be accountable to the leader that you're committed to being, and building relational ecosystems that are going to help make the work sustainable for you over the long term. And so almost everything that we talk about is incredibly complicated, right? So there's context, whether it's environmental, whether it's cultural, whether it's political, organizational, like whatever it is, there's all of these layers of complexity that exist in the work that we do. And even when we have the best of intentions, and even when we are actively trying to consciously choose the best path forward, we don't always do what we want to do. And it's not our fault. We're socialized in this dynamic. We've got the pressures from the outside that are impacting us. And sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And so community is really, really important to help us kind of let go of some of that socialization, to hold us accountable to the person and to the leader that we want to be, and to creating or co-creating the culture that we want to co-create with our communities. And so our next dimension is going to be talking about community, and who specifically do you have to hold you accountable and to hold your team accountable. And I guess maybe one last thing that I will say is that your choices under pressure are going to reveal who you are, right? It is us demonstrating our integrity to our team. And the systems or the processes that you build or rebuild are what is going to reveal the cultural context of your team and of your organization. And together, this is how you actually create change. You doing the hard work, your team doing the hard work, and creating a framework for the exact values and the exact outcomes that you as a leader want to see from the organization. And so with that, I will say thank you all so much for joining. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to listen, to share, and really, really appreciate it. And so with that, I will say thank you for being here. Thank you for leading with care. Thank you for leading with intention. And thank you for trusting me to share a little bit of time and space. So with deep love and gratitude for you all, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. And don't forget to join us for the next live session that will be at the end of April.